Oh, your turn to talk a bit, Will. I mean, you've done a lot of work documenting our terroir and the importance of that. Perhaps you'd like to talk, you
A bit
know,
more.
a bit more about that.
Certainly. So I think when we talk terroir, as you've said, it's the provenance, its sense of place. It's putting the vineyard in its location and the wine, most importantly, to express that location. So what are the key components? I think using the French approach to viticulture, the top component is climate. I got to say, this is probably the most overemphasized phrase here in the Australian wine industry. We use cool climate as the arbiter of quality. To be frank, that is not the truth. It's probably very far from the truth because we have magnificent wines made in warm climates here in Australia. What I think of it more about is it's really a guide to varietal selection. There have been some discoveries, and we've discovered them here ourselves using what is a relatively not cool, but not warm climate variety like a Bordeaux Cabernet. Has grown beautifully in this type of climate, cooler climate we have here. But it really does sort of indicate we couldn't make a Nero d'Avalo probably in a cooler climate, and probably like in the same way you probably couldn't make a Chardonnay in Sicily. So it's really important from that perspective. But really I wouldn't take it beyond that to which is if it's not cool or it's not warm, it's not going to make a great wine. The next one is location. Now I know many of us have looked at maps, many of us have been maybe to Burgundy, to Bordeaux, definitely around Australia. You start realizing locations are quite critical for some of these appellations that they've developed over there. The main one is that Burgundy and its sister province, Champagne, which both are about Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, are a long way from the coast. To be specific, they're 400 kilometres from the coast. So this is what we call a continental climate. It's not a maritime climate. I know we spend a lot of time down in Sydney or various other cities in Australia. We are beholden to our maritime climate with the beaches, but the main reason we love them so much is the ocean regulates temperature. It stops massive variations, keeps it nice and comfortable for us. It's why we go on holiday there. It's why we love living there. Problem is for Pinot and Chardonnay, is they actually need to be treated a little bit tough, I guess a little bit more hard, a bit more difficulty. The reason what I'm trying to say there is that they love a continental climate. And that's why Burgundy and Champagne are where they are. Why they love it? Because what happens is it sends mixed signals. It's a biological signal to the vines. It's getting cold at night, hot day, cold at night, hot day. It stresses them out. It thickens the skins up. That is wonderful why you get your great middle palate lush Burgundian Pinots. Sometimes you don't find very easily here in Australia, because those thicker skins is where you obviously get your flavour. I use rosé as a great example. It's red wine without skin, so it's very important. Also means you get lovely skin tannins, which is really important from the perspective of oak utilisation. So you don't have to use as much oak when you get nice thick skins. So you end up with these much more vibrant, fruit-driven wines. We planted a vineyard. We spent a lot of money and a lot of effort, a lot of heartache and sorrow out there in a vineyard, not an oak forest. So that's what we want to be talking through our wines. Also, the cooler nights slow down the ripening process. So what that means is that you get a lovely sugar accumulation, which we call Beaume or Brix if you're overseas, but it matches up with flavour ripeness. The danger you can have with some varieties is that it gets away from itself. You get this massive ripening of sugar. The flavour is just not there. So you either end up with a very high alcohol wine to achieve that flavour ripeness, or you have a very lack of flavour, very lightweight wine, because you're trying not to let the alcohol get too high. So that's the sugar and alcohol relationship. So that's important. But I guess when you're looking at the map, as we've said, 400 kilometres from the coast, if you look a little bit smaller, you'll notice that especially Burgundy, the plantings of it are incredibly thin. They're 60 kilometres long by about 1 to 2 kilometres wide, but arguably the best bits are probably only 50 to 100 metres wide if you've actually walked up and down the valley around the town of Beaune. Why that valley is so narrow, and it really indicates and why there's only that limited planting, besides a bit of Chablis and some of the newer regions, Mâconnais and the like, is it proves that climate location, so climate temperature and climate location or climate type, is important, but it's definitely not the arbiter, because if it was, every single valley of Burgundy would be covered by vines. It's not, it's very restricted. And what restricts it is the presence of limestone. I know in Australia we're cognizant of limestone. I think in the back of our minds we think of it, you see some of it in South Australia, there's a little bit of around in various regions, but it's not very prevalent, so we don't think about it as that important. And what limestone is limestone's a coastal rock. So you have to think geologically, 150 million years ago, France was most of it was under a very shallow sea. It was called the Paris Basin. There was another basin called the Aquitaine Basin near Bordeaux, but the Paris Basin is probably the most famous. It extended from the cliffs of Dover, went down through Champagne, Burgundy, and across through the Loire. And on coastlines, as we know all too well in Australia, is you get shellfish, oysters in particular, you get coral reefs. Over the eons, that gets compressed. Those dead shellfish get compressed into chalk in Champagne, and they get compressed into limestone, which you see in Burgundy. And that's why when you look, it's very narrow, because when you're looking at oyster growing, if you've been around Sydney and up in the some of the river systems, the Hawkesbury and the like, is it doesn't grow deep offshore. It's a very narrow, I guess, climb or a style of water or surface geology that they can actually live within. So that's been one of the reasons for the narrow planting. But why limestone? I guess the way I look at it is, and this is probably the most important function of viticulture, is soil. And soil is the stomach of the vineyard. So we wear our stomach on the inside, vines wear their stomach on the outside. On the soil, they have cilia which go out, and their job is to bring in nutrients to feed the vine's body, to feed the vine's foliage, the canopy, the fruit. When you're looking at that, much like the human gut, we have a biome in there. We've got a microflora in there. Its job is to digest food, to make it available to our system, to send it around to make us healthy. It's really important for our health and well-being, exactly the same for vines. So we have the same in the vineyard, deep in the soil in here, with it not deep, right near the surface, right at the surface. You have an incredible groupings of bacteria and stygophonas, all these different bits and pieces whose job it is to break down the coppers, the borons, the zincs, aluminiums, all these other metals that perform the same job as multivitamins do with humans. In a limestone environment, they are much more efficient. They are much more able to digest and secrete and make these metals and minerals available. So with that, I think of limestone as a bit like the yogurt of the soil. It produces that really lovely, rich environment for those microorganisms to thrive. And what that means and what that translates to viticulturally, and why it's so important for winemaking, is that really efficient soils mean you don't need a lot of it. This whole mentality around depth of soil is human psychology. We love it with oak trees and deep roots. Vines, you want a shallow soil, because what that means is when it rains, there's only maybe a half a metre to a metre of actual soil moisture from which they can drink upon. The vines are healthy because of the microorganisms, the limestone, but what that translates to is that the grapes become very water stressed. So if you were to walk through your local supermarket and you were to look at a grapeberry, you would see that it's very large, it's very succulent, very, very refreshing. The best grapes in the world, I think the smallest grapes in the world are in a little area called Volnay, which is in Burgundy. They're pea-sized. So because they've been under a lot of water stress, the soils are very shallow, the vines are very healthy, you get these fantastic thick skins, not a lot of juice, so you get an additional boost to structure and flavour of the wine. The backbone of the wine is even stronger from the tannin perspective, and that produces some of the best wines in the world. If I was just to leave it on that point, one of the greatest vineyards in the world is obviously Domaine Romani Conti. There are a lot of imitators out there, but no one's actually been able to do it properly. It really demonstrates the power of terroir. They are mid-slope Burgundy, so there's been some erosion, has kept the soils relatively shallow. The limestone is pretty near surface, and that vineyard there is arguably the best wine. And the reason why it's the best wine, when I speak to people who've actually have the money to be able to afford it, is that every vintage is a good vintage there. They don't have bad vintages. And that's because the soil is able to keep that vine performing regardless of what the climate throws at it.
How deep is that soil?
The soil is about half a metre deep. So it's very, very, very shallow. So what when we're talking about a viticultural perspective, we're talking about the importance definitely temperature is important from a varietal selection. Inland location supports that, helps build out some of the characteristics, especially the ripening profile. But the soil is really what drives the highest quality. And in Burgundy, as we know, you can move 50 meters, 100 meters, sometimes 20 meters, and you can go from a wine that's tens of thousands of dollars to a wine that's maybe $40. And so I guess the proof is in the pudding. We are here obviously big believers when we talk about the importance of location. They're the key characteristics that we were looking